Horizon Chess, Home Studio Reaction. This is the big problem the Air Force's NGAD fighter has to overcome. Virtual Sandbox. Yes, I guess this is more detailed video on NGAD. Hmm. This was a month ago, so I guess he's gonna talk about if this program gets resumed, more like when it's gonna get resumed. What are the things it has to overcome? This was a Sandbox. Sandbox is a great channel for analysis like this and things that already play at there, right? I guess he knows that because he knows people, right? Who knows people, I guess, experts, whatever. So it's gonna be interesting. Let's watch this one. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, so that way I know which type of videos to react to more. I like watching videos like this, tech videos basically. What's gonna be the future of tech? China already has its newer plane, J36 or whatever, right? The big one with three engines and whatever. So how is NGAD is gonna look, right? Other countries are also like trying to make their fifth or whatever generation planes. How they're gonna look? What is the future of tech landscapes gonna look like? Are there going to be laser inside them? Who knows? So let's watch this one.
After a decade of development behind the veil of classified funding, America's new air superiority fighter, being developed within the Next Generation Air Dominance program, currently remains on hold, pending some difficult budgetary decisions for the Trump administration. This new fighter is meant to fly at the center of a constellation of AI-enabled drone wingmen, bringing a new generation of beyond visual range weapons to bear while offering greater speed, range, and payload than the top-tier fighters in service today. This program, we've come to learn, has already produced at least 3 flying prototypes, and according to the Air Force, these exotic airframes have already set some kinds of performance records in testing as far back as 5 years ago. But a new Air Force report predicting changes to the threat environment out through 2050 doesn't just place the future of the NGAD program into question, it predicts a complete upheaval of American air warfare doctrine and directly questions whether fighters like NGAD even have a place on the mid-21st century battlefield. In fact, it questions whether air superiority in large-scale future conflicts can even be gained at all. In the rapidly changing world of the next quarter century, it seems, the Air Force believes new aircraft will either die a fighter or live long enough to see themselves become bombers. And with the NGAD program already apparently sacrificing aerobatic maneuverability for increased stealth and larger payloads, the question is becoming, what exactly can this new fighter do that the B-21 Raider can't do itself? So let's talk about what's going on with the NGAD program and how its design priorities both reflect the rapidly changing world the Air Force envisions, but also how those priorities have so effectively blurred the lines between fighters and bombers that the NGAD program's biggest problem may be its own record-breaking performance. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. North Korean troops under Russian command are seeing combat in Ukraine for the first time in decades, and by all accounts, it is not going well for them. I've been staying on top of this story using Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by outlets all around the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed, making it easier than ever to not just stay on top of what's going on in the world, but also to see right through the
Yeah, we'll go to ground.news faucet, sandbox, and support this channel. We'll go to origin video page link.
X's to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. With the NGAD fighter program still on hold, the Air Force believes it'll take another $20 billion in development funding to get the aircraft into production, at which point each of the 200 or so airframes the branch aims to purchase are projected to cost in the neighborhood of $300 million. Now that is a massive sticker price, even as compared to the world's most advanced fighter in service today, the F-35, which rings in at only around $80 million a copy for the Runway Queen variant. Of course, that shouldn't really be much of a surprise. New fighters are always really expensive early in production, with both the F 22 and F 35 ringing in at north of $200 million per airframe in their own infancy. But because the Air Force only intends to purchase 200 of these aircraft, production volume cannot save the program from high acquisition costs, as we've seen with the F 35 in recent years. And perhaps most importantly, the Air Force is currently funding the development and the production of the LGM 35A Sentinel ICBM, which is already projected to be $40 billion over budget, and a burgeoning fleet of new stealth bombers in the B 21 Raider, making it all but impossible to also fund the continued development and production of a new stealth fighter, at least not without a big boost in the Air Force's budget. In December of 2024, the Air Force submitted a new report to Congress entitled The Department of the Air Force in 2050, outlining its predictions about the rapidly changing face of warfare throughout the next quarter century. This report, it is worth noting, goes well out of its way to highlight just how tough making even educated predictions about the future.
Yeah, that is so interesting, right? Like one would think like US has $700 billion budget in defense, military in general. So you're like, okay, you can't find a portion of that for NGAD. It's literally like one of the headline making thing. Like China is making it, right? Like, oh, US is still making like the next generation, sixth generation plane or whatever. But that's not how USF works. USF sections of things like Air Force is its own thing. Air Force has its own budget. Now they have to do something inside of that budget, right? While in China it's different, right? Like even though like every section is their own, they're all under like Beijing, right? And Xi Jinping and like his people, his generals or whatever can just dictate like, oh, sixth generation plane is really important to me. That is definitely happening. Well, in USA, since it's democracy, everybody's sectioned off. Like this is an Air Force, this is like Army, this is like Navy, and like everything's bureaucratic ladder. So Air Force cannot go outside of their budget because like they can just say, oh, we want more money because NGAD is like, no, you have your budget, Army has their own budget. They all fight each other in a way for the budget, right? So they have to be like, okay, I need this. So I can't really put together money for NGAD, even though the whole military has $700 billion budget. That is really interesting when you see like how like Chinese communism can work when you don't have to worry about democracy and any bureaucracy that come with it versus how a democratic country works like America, right? This is the differences.
Future of conflict really can be. And rather than delving into specifics, it instead emphasizes trends in both American and adversary technology development and then extrapolates to find their logical progression in the years ahead. And now we'll be delving much deeper into this report and into the combat environment they envision for 2050 in another video to come. But for now, let's focus on how the Air Force's predictions for the future align with what we currently know about the branch's new air superiority fighter, and what that means for the program itself. As we've covered on this channel before, this new fighter effort was born out of a classified 2014 study entitled the Dominance Initiative, which, like the Air Force 2050 report, sought to assess the capabilities a new fighter would need to bring to bear in order to dominate air combat in the decades ahead. The contents of this report directly led to a highly classified new billion-dollar X-plane program that saw participation from the Air Force, the Navy, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, better known as DARPA. By 2020, we've come to learn this effort had produced at least one flying technology demonstrator that, according to former Air Force official Will Roper, had already set some kinds of performance records in testing, though what records exactly, we still don't know. In the years since, we've come to learn that there are at least 3 prototype aircraft associated with this program, which could align with the 3 prime contractors originally competing for the contract: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. Of course, more recently, Northrop Grumman pulled out of this competition, leaving the race up to Lockheed Martin and Boeing, but Northrop has been clear that they still intend to compete for the Navy's next stealth fighter contract that also emerged out of that same X-plane effort. To date, details about these prototypes remain incredibly sparse, but while we don't know much about the aircraft themselves, we do have a fairly sound understanding of the requirements that informed them. Several Air Force reports now, including the Air Force Air Superiority 2030 Flight Plan, all outline the need for an integrated and resilient high-capacity kill web of sorts, networking fighters, bombers, surface systems, and weapons to maximize their efficacy in increasingly hostile airspace, centered around a quote, penetrating counter-air platform, capable of surviving in such an environment. Now, in normal English, we usually call that a stealth fighter. This new aircraft would need to offer improved stealth over today's fifth-generation fighters like the F-22 and F-35, which the combination of Air Force reports and renders released by prime contractors suggest would be accomplished through the use of advanced materials and an even stealthier overall plane form, seemingly omitting the standing vertical tail surfaces that have long been a requisite in fighter aircraft for aerobatic maneuverability. Instead, these new fighters seem to lean further into the long-standing stealth bomber design methodology of prioritizing stealth.
Yeah, China's J-36 was also similar like that, right? No vertical tails. Kind of makes sense in the modern way how things are going. Like dogfighting is not going to be the case of the future. Like if you're that close, like something has went wrong, right? With the advanced technology we have, advanced targeting system, you can probably destroy a target much before it even come close. Not to mention if you're going to do the kill web thing, you're probably gonna have like a whole area covered, like what is happening, what is where, right? With multiple things, like you should know where the target is much before it comes close to it. So there's no need for the vertical thing. That makes sense. What what really concerns me, not concerns me. What's something that I really think about is that in the past, like any technology stayed there for decades, right? Multiple decades, 4 decades or something before a new thing comes out. Is that still going to be true in the future? Because in every place we've seen how technology becomes much rapid, right? Before, like new appliances or something like that came out every decade or something. Nowadays, like every year or two. So in when it comes to military tech, because of the AI and everything, what if the time NGAD takes to become a thing, there is another new technology already came out, and something like China or some other major power is already making another one, the next one after that, before NGAD can even become a thing, right? So is making of a plane taking 10, 15 years and then staying there for like 3, 4 decades, is that going to be a thing still? Or the technology is going to come out so fast that they constantly need to upgrade it? That's the thing. Like I'm pretty sure somebody told me that NGAD is going to be made in a way, it's going to be modular entirely. Like you can swap out things in the future with the new upgrades at a point where it will feel like completely different plane. So maybe that's why they're thinking it, because technology is going to become better and better. Things will constantly change.
Over hot rod performance. Other problems the Air Force sought to solve with this new fighter include the fairly limited range and payload capabilities offered by the reigning King of the Sky F-22 Raptor, which is currently capable of carrying a respectable 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders internally, without compromising its stealth profile. But the Raptor also offers a somewhat anemic combat radius of less than 700 miles without its external fuel tanks. The NGAD fighter that replaces the Raptor would invariably need a huge boost in range. But for just how much more range it might need, we can look to that recently released 2050 report for a solid idea. Now, to be clear, the Air Force's 2050 report paints a grim picture of the future of air warfare. So grim, in fact, that it argues the branch needs to completely shift the makeup of its warfighting aircraft fleets, with fighters like those in service today, and especially like the F-22 Raptor, rendered practically obsolete due to two distinct development trends. The first is the rapidly increasing range and targeting precision of land attack, hypersonic, ballistic, and cruise missiles being fielded by adversary nations like China. By 2050, the Air Force predicts these weapons will have made massing air power at forward air bases anywhere near the battlefield all but impossible, because the Air Force pretty logically predicts that no hardened aircraft shelters or advanced air defense systems could possibly fend off consistent long-range bombardments and the saturation attacks that China's large missile stockpiles would allow. To put it bluntly, the Air Force believes no airfield within thousands of miles of China would be safe for American fighters to operate out of by 2050. The second development trend the Air Force predicts that could inform the NGAD fighters' range requirements would come in the form of new surface-to-air missiles that glean their targeting data from space-based sensors, making it possible to bring down airborne targets from 1,000 miles out. Today's most advanced adversary air defense systems, like Russia's S-500 and the most modern iterations of China's HQ-9, have maximum engagement ranges of roughly 250 miles today, using interceptors like Russia's 40N6 system. But these systems are limited by the reach of the radar arrays that feed them target data, and if you're getting that target data from a satellite instead, well, then you can build interceptors to reach significantly further out. Now, to be clear, these 1,000-mile intercepts wouldn't really be a problem for the NGAD fighter itself, as its stealth would make targeting really tough at that range, and the fighter would have ample opportunity to shake an inbound missile covering all that distance. But these missiles would make operating America's massive fleet of airborne refueling tankers pretty much impossible anywhere within 1,000 miles of these air defense systems, eliminating the vital link relatively short-legged fighters like the F-22 would need to get into the fight. Or to sum it all up, the Air Force believes the only viable aircraft in a 2050 fight would be those carrying enough fuel to operate from significant ranges, ranges offered currently only by heavy payload strategic bombers. And in order for NGAD to be viable, it would need to have similar range capabilities. And therein lies what may be the NGAD program's biggest problem. The only truly feasible way to increase the range of a supersonic fighter is to increase its internal fuel capacity, something that can be fairly easily accomplished by extending its wingspan, as we've seen with previous efforts to turn short-legged tactical fighters into strike fighters or regional bombers like the F-16XL effort in the 1980s and the FB-22 concept from the early 2000s. Both of these programs took existing fighter designs and incorporated much larger delta or diamond-shaped wings that offered both increased fuel storage and increased lift, which also supports longer ranges and greater payloads. These changes allowed the F-16XL to carry twice the payload of the F-16A that it was based on to targets more than 40% further out. And in the case of the FB-22, which we'll be discussing in more depth in an upcoming video, it tripled the range of the stealth fighter out to better than 2,000 miles. But both of these aircraft were intended.
I mean, again, that makes sense if we look at J-36 from China. It's also like big ass plane, diamond shaped plane, right? Compared to their other stealth plane, it was like really big. So I'm guessing NGAD gonna look similar, like I don't know, 40-50% bigger size than what is it, F-22 or something. And yeah, it's gonna have like a massive fuel capacity because of that. Makes sense.
Intended to serve not as air superiority fighters, but rather as air-to-ground focused fighter bombers, and their range-extending designs came with distinct compromises in terms of air-to-air performance, especially in the case of the FB-22, which would have been limited to 6G maneuvers and lost the Raptor's ability to supercruise or maintain supersonic speed without the use of its afterburners. And worse still, even the roughly 1,000-mile combat radius offered by the FB-22 would still not be enough for the NGAD fighter to be effective in the Air Force's envisioned future. To this end, it's already broadly expected that the NGAD fighter will come with a reduction in aerobatic capability, at least as compared to thrust vectoring hot rods like the F-22, due in no small part to the elimination of standing vertical tail surfaces and that dramatic increase in fuel and payload. Instead, this new fighter will prioritize all-aspect stealth, reducing detectability.
I mean, again, like no vertical tail, right? The size of it, yeah, it's not gonna be as agile as F-22. I'm guessing the same thing applies to China's big plane, right? But again, that's not their thing, right? Their job is different. I already see it when it becomes a thing. People will like put some kind of exercise with like J-22 or other planes. Like, look at that. The new NGAD lost to, I guess, Rafale from France or something. And oh, look at that. Military wasted money or shit like that. I can already see that coming.
Against low frequency early warning radar systems, as well as targeting from angles other than head on. In short, this new fighter's approach to survivability will be much more akin to stealth bombers like the B 2 Spirit than stealth coded knife fighters like the F 22. It's also well understood by now that this new fighter is meant to serve as the centerpiece of a constellation of systems that include new long range air to air missiles and, most importantly, AI enabled drone wingmen being developed in the Collaborative Combat Aircraft or CCA program. These drone fighters will fly with advanced AI agents on board that, while lacking the ability to handle the creative decision making required of fighter pilots in complex combat environments, will be exceedingly good at completing air combat tasks as assigned to them by the NGAD pilot. Depending on the ultimate form the NGAD fighter takes, these CCA drones may even represent the vast majority of the formation's combat power, with that crewed fighter relying on stealth to operate further removed from the fray as its drone minions take care of the heavy fighting. So, broadly speaking, the NGAD fighter will need to be large enough to offer a combat radius that's well in excess of 1,000 miles, with the necessary sensors on board to leverage a respectable number of advanced new long range missiles and the requisite avionics to effectively manage a formation of drone wingmen. It also seems likely that the aircraft will operate at high altitudes to maximize line of sight for its sensors and the kinematics of its air to air missiles, all while using new adaptive cycle engines to maintain supersonic speeds for extended periods of time, likely while supercruising. And to be clear, that all sounds like one hell of a fighter, maybe even one that's worth another $20 billion in development and a $300 million sticker price. But there's just one big problem with that plan. With the exception of flying at supersonic speeds, every one of those game changing capabilities are already baked into an aircraft that's not only already in low rate initial production, but thus far seems to be the only stealth aircraft in history to be pretty much on time and on budget: the B
B-21.
21 Raider. As we've discussed on this channel before, the B 21 is slated to be much more than a new stealth bomber. This aircraft carries the most advanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities ever fielded in a combat aircraft, married up to an advanced avionics suite meant to allow the Raider to serve as an entire kill chain unto itself, identifying, tracking, and engaging targets using its own weapons in the air or on the ground, or directing other networked platforms to engage them on its behalf, before using its onboard sensors again to assess the efficacy of the engagement. In a real way, the B 21 is meant to operate as a supremely stealthy battle manager, and one of the central hubs in newly emerging kill webs that fuse data gleaned from a long list of surface based and airborne sensors to create a single all encompassing view of the battle space, and then to engage targets within that space using networked weapons launched or dropped by any number of ground based or airborne platforms. To put it simply, if the F 35 is a quarterback in the sky, the B 21 is meant to be an offensive coordinator instead. But with such significant overlap in the capabilities the B 21 and this new NGAD fighter are expected to bring to bear, the question becomes, well, what additional capabilities will NGAD provide to make it worth another $20 billion?
That is a good question, really. Like NGAD is gonna be like big fucking plane compared to F-22, F-35. I mean, it just makes sense, right? It's not gonna have vertical tails and things. So basically, that sounds like a bomber, like how B2 was, but more advanced. How B-21 is going to be. B-21 is probably gonna be bigger, but then again, like, what is NGAD gonna do? that B-21 Raider can't. Maybe speed, since B-21 Raider is big, has a big range. I don't think it's going to be able to do the same speed as NGAD can. But then again, it I guess for time sensitive things it might work. I don't know. Like it's NGAD is not an interceptor. It doesn't. I mean, time sensitive thing is speed is going to matter, but I don't know. Yeah, there must be a lot of things NGAD able to do. I think what's going to happen is like they're going to find a way to make it agile somehow, so they can like rationalize at least like why we need NGAD. Because if it just like does the same job a B-21 Raider can do, like why are we doing this? That's going to be the question.
Dollars and the continued risk of budgetary overruns and technical setbacks that have plagued America's last few fighter acquisitions. Because if NGAD emerges as an aircraft that can do all the things the B 21 can do, but with less range and smaller payloads, just at higher sustained speeds, policymakers may seriously question whether the ability to fly at supersonic speeds is really worth all that investment. Now, to be clear, this is not me arguing.
I mean, it is. I would argue it is because if China, Russia, places like this, if they have like much advanced system for detecting something, you need higher speeds to do your job and get out before they can realize it. And B-21 Raider is huge, is big. It has a very bomber-esque bomber role and bomber type roles. Can you need a certain thing for time sensitive jobs, like go in, go out type of shit. B-21 can't do that.
In favor of canceling the NGAD program. In fact, in the interest of full disclosure, my personal feelings are the complete opposite. The Air Force's NGAD program and the Navy's sibling effort, often referred to as FAXX, represent the future of American force projection and a vital element of America's long-standing way of war. But I still have to acknowledge that for NGAD to receive the funding it needs, it will also have to find a way to differentiate itself from increasingly capable bombers that, in the near future, will all but certainly be able to carry air-to-air weapons of their own. In past eras, where bombers were strictly bombers and fighters were strictly fighters, it was essential to fund the continued development and production of both. But in a new world, where fighters engage ground targets far more often than airborne ones, where bombers carry all the requisite systems to employ their own air-to-air missiles, and when most engagements occur well beyond visual range, the question stops being, which fighters and which bombers should we build, and instead becomes, well, which aircraft can do the job? And if the B 21 really can manage the air superiority mission through a combination of onboard weapons and networked CCA drones, a new fighter will need to offer something pretty spectacular to justify its cost. And I, for one, am hoping that's exactly what NGAD does. And with that, ends this edition of Air Power from Sandbox.
There's another element like B-21 Raider is gonna cost a fuck ton because it's big. Measurement tape rule. If it's bigger, a lot of shit is inside of it. Yeah, it's gonna be costlier. It's a bomber. NGAD can have like much lesser price tag than it, right? Eventually, it will be much just like F-35. It's gonna have much lower price tag, right? Earlier, it's like 300 million, but it's gonna go down. In wartime, you don't want to throw out 100 B-21 Raiders to do a air dominance job. That's just wasted money. Like, yeah, if it gets shots down, like a lot of money is gone thrown around, right? Uh, so something like NGAD is going to be a must. It's like a thing to have. It's like saying like, why do you need infantrymen when you just have a tank there? Send 1,000 tanks there. Yeah, but you only need 10 tanks and other infantrymen. Sending 1,000 tanks is not really the thing. That kind of way, right? So yeah, NGAD is probably needed. Well, that was the big problem the Air Force's NGAD fighter has to overcome much on Sandbox. If you like my reason, don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you next time.